is Andrew Anstrom, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the Groasis Waterboxx, and specifically the project we have been using them for in Austin, Texas, with an initiative that my company has started called Shade Our Streets. And so basically with Shade Our Streets, we're trying to utilize the Waterboxx technology to plant the urban forest of the future. So, Peter talked a lot about how the Waterboxx is the solution for heavily degraded soils and poor soils. Well, it's very clear to me that urban soils qualify as degraded, very poor soils. And what we're finding and what we're trying to do is use this technology in an urban setting to really get great effects and plant a lot of trees. So who is this guy? Who am I? My name is Andrew Anstrom. I'm a board-certified master arborist. I'm the owner of the Tree Amigos, which is a tree service in Austin, Texas. I have a bachelor's degree in forestry from Stephen F., which isn't too far from here. I've been working with trees, planting, trimming, removals, all of it for about 14 years. I'm a born and raised Austinite, which are a dying breed. And I'm the sole distributor of Waterboxx in America. So if you want water boxes and you don't want to order them from the Netherlands, you will be talking to me. I'm not sure why no one else has taken this on. There were a couple companies that tried, but they gave up at some point. I learned about the technology and wanted to bring it to America because I think the American South and the American Southwest in particular can really benefit from what the Waterboxx does. So the vision of Shade Our Streets is that we believe every person in the city benefits from having trees, and we think that I can't afford it is not a good excuse to not plant trees at your property. So our goal is to make this a zero-cost program for people who cannot afford to plant trees but want to plant trees. The only caveat is those trees have to be planted an inch outside of the city right-of-way along the street, so that they provide public benefit and do not just benefit the homeowner. Our initiative will work with property stakeholders to establish trees within right-of-ways that will grow to shade the streets and adjacent walkways. And our main goal is to help reduce the urban heat island effect. A lot of what Peter was talking about, humans destroying the planet, humans, causing cancer on the planet. A lot of where we feel that as humans is in cities, and the urban heat island effect is just a very measurable effect that we feel from that urbanization. So this is our pilot project. I've only been a distributor for about a year, and this is Shade Our Streets' first project. As you can see, we took this degraded soil at a church, a block away from a school, high traffic for streets. The street gets a lot of traffic, the sidewalk gets a lot of traffic, and no shade. In Texas, no shade is no fun. And if we can shade that walkway, if we can make that walkway a place people want to be, it'll bring wildlife back. It'll improve the quality of the lives of everyone in that area. So here's just a couple close-ups of a few of those trees. This is about 6 months. No, this is about 3 months after planting. These trees have this tree on the right is a Montezuma cypress. And it probably tripled in growth, and the tree on the left is an escarpment live oak, and it quadrupled in growth in about 3 months, just from that initial filling. We did have some decent rainfall, but that initial filling of about 4 gallons of water is all the water that humans provided to these trees. So why trees? Why do we want trees in cities? There's basic human health benefits. They found research that higher urban forest canopy leads to increased birth weights. Birth weight is a statistic that a lot of scientists use just to assess general public health. So generally, it has been shown to improve public health. There's increased recovery time for people who are sick. If you have a view of trees from your hospital bed, you will recover significantly, measurably faster, up to 30%. And having higher urban canopy cover reduces depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, chronic diseases. All of these things have been researched and proven that tree canopy cover in cities does have positive human health benefit. There have been studies out of Chicago that show that trees in the schoolyards, in the cafeteria areas, increase academic achievement in school. So there's even some educational benefit to having trees. Everyone likes to study underneath a tree. And then reduce crime. In Connecticut and Baltimore, they have studies that show by increasing the urban canopy cover, you actually decrease the crime rate. And I know in Austin, when I think of the areas with the highest crime, Runberg and Lamar comes to mind immediately. There's no trees. It's barren, which is just very stark observational evidence of that. Why streets? Why do we want to put these close to the streets? It comes back to that urban heat island effect. Urban conditions can cause a 4 to 9 degree Fahrenheit increase in local temperatures, which is very significant. The difference between 80 and 90 is staggering. The difference between 90 and 100 is staggering. The difference between 100 and 110, you can feel the heat in your bones when it's 110. So it's a very measurable effect, and it's very real, and anything we can do to mitigate that will go a long way in keeping people healthier, keeping our cities happier. So these street trees that we're planting will lower that or affect that urban heat island effect, first of all, just by casting shade on concrete, shade on the sidewalk, shade on the asphalt, help reduce that reflection of heat. They'll also reflect the heat higher in the canopy of the tree, so you don't feel that local change in temperature as much. Evapotranspiration, just by the trees doing their own physical processes, they actually will reduce local air temperatures. They improve air quality, which is huge, by filtering air. And there have been studies that show by increasing the tree cover by 10%, you can bring the temperatures down by 1 to 2 degrees. And why we're putting these trees on the streets, these free trees as close to the street as possible, is that there's just public benefit. It is private property that we're aiming to put these trees on, but by having them so close to the street, they're benefiting everyone. So that's why we're planting street trees. So why Waterboxx? Why this technology? Why are we choosing this for our initiative? I think the documentary made it pretty clear. It takes way less water. That is just the reality of it. We also plant trees commercially, 30 gallon, 45 gallon, and those trees take considerably more amount of water to get them established on site. We're seeing these trees established in as little as 3 months with just the initial 4 gallons that we put on the tree. We're a little lucky that we have a little more flexibility than Peter had in a lot of his projects. They have to come in as part of the process of installing the Waterboxx and water beforehand. We just waited till it rained. And then that took all that additional labor of coming in and pre-watering the holes before we did the planting. Just by waiting till it rained and coming right after that and doing it, it was only 1 visit as opposed to the recommended watering of the night before. So let's go into why Waterboxx. Less water. For the Waterboxx, you need about, if you do that rain technique, you only need that 4 gallons to fill the box. Obviously, if you're going to pre-water the hole, it can take significantly more. You fill once at planting. I put in here that you only need to refill it a month maximum. When you do these in an urban setting, you have the advantage that you can easily refill these using public water that's relatively cheap. In Austin, 1,000 gallons of water, if you're paying your water bill, can be as low as $3 or $4, or even less. So if you really wanted your trees to thrive, you could just refill the box and water the tree once a month. Then you're not even, waiting for the effect of the condensation to refill the box. You can just do it yourself. We did not. For our initial project, we did that initial watering, and we haven't touched them since. We've just did our 6-month survival study, and we had 77% survival, which I don't know if you've ever tried to just plant saplings and not water them. You're going to get closer to 10 to 15. And we planted in March. We would have planted earlier in the year, but my wife gave birth to our child, and so we've ever been through that, but your side projects get pushed back a little bit. So we planted in March, and so they had very little time to dig their roots in before the summer heat of Texas started, which is what would kill these trees normally. And we still got 77% survival. These are also the first time we've planted these, so we made mistakes. There's probably things we could have improved. And so even just on our first run, we had great success. And it only took a few months for the trees to be established, which means the roots have dug in and you can't just pull them out. And for those 150 trees, we probably used a little over 600 gallons, all told, for 6 months of growth. A traditional 30-gallon, which is what we would normally plant, you're looking at a minimum of 550 gallons in the first year to keep that tree going. The first 2 weeks, you want to water it about 10 gallons every day. So that's 140 gallons right off the bat, just so that your tree doesn't die in the first 2 weeks. You're going to have to physically water either yourself or an automated system 2 to 3 times a week to keep that tree alive in the first year. You can actually get great survival if you follow instructions and you water those trees, but already the water has gone out of control. And it takes a few years for a 30-gallon tree to establish sometimes. That first year, the roots have barely expanded. It's still just dealing with the trauma of being put in that hole, and it hasn't rooted in at all. And so for 150 30-gallon trees, minimum the first year, you're looking at 82,000 gallons of water, which, 600 to 82,000, the difference is clear. Lower cost. The number, this is for a 30-gallon tree. This is the $291 for a 30-gallon tree is exceptionally low. This would be if you're doing this at a massive scale, like 150 trees. When I sell one of these trees to a single homeowner, they're looking at closer to $800 to get that one tree professionally planted in the ground. I think I can get a water box in the ground for $54. Of course, this does assume you're using that pre-watering technique of waiting till it rains, because if you do have to come and water ahead of time, that's a whole other visit. That adds a lot of time to the process. But I timed it, and just with a pickaxe and a shovel, I can get one of these in the ground in 10 minutes. I've been planting trees my whole life. I can probably do a 30-gallon in 30 minutes, but usually you need 2 guys to do it that fast. But you can see, to plant a project like ours, 150 trees, total cost for the water box, you're looking at $8,000. Whereas if I was planting 150 30 gallons, this is the low end, would be around $43,000. I mean, those are just staggering differences. Obviously, the 30 gallons are going to be bigger, provide more immediate benefits, but the better tree is going to be the one that starts smaller. That's common knowledge in the tree world. The smaller you start, the better long-term success that tree is going to have. Easy transport. On the left, you can see a Toyota Prius planting trees. That is not real. I've had AI make that image. But you can probably, if you really worked, fit 150 water boxes and 150 trees in the back of a Toyota Prius. I'm not exaggerating. That trailer on the right, there's maybe 30, 45 trees on that trailer. So you need a massive truck, massive trailer, very difficult to move. You need very difficult to load, whereas the water box, just, you can fit it in a car. It's pretty wild, or a little wagon. The other is that they're reusable. He made the point that one group planted 3,000 trees with one run of water boxes. You can reuse these up to 10 times. I would argue more. It is a very durable plastic. So that cost I was showing earlier, the $56, your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 10th tree are all going to be a lot cheaper to plant because you're not paying for that water box again. If the tree dies in the same location, you still want a tree there, you just pull the tree out, put a new one in, you refill the box, you start again. Maybe give it a little wipe, clean out the holes. This box here is one we planted. Someone lit it on fire. I'm not quite sure why they did that, but they melted the box. But we can try again in that spot for just $40, $50 to get a new box in. So just a little more about the pilot project. 125 on a church property. We did pecan, chinkapin oak, escarpment live oak, Monterey oak, Montezuma cypress, and cedar elm. Only watered initial planting. Relatively wet early summer, but it hasn't rained in Austin since the end of July. So any other saplings would have been roasted in 2.5, 3 months of zero water. It doesn't look like we're getting much rain this October, which is pretty sad. October is usually one of our wettest months. It is not shaping up to be that way. Here in Houston, I think you'll get triple the water, 90 inches or something like that a year, so much less of an issue here. And we planted these with a climate and equity grant from the city of Austin. They bought the water boxes, we donated the labor. So here you can see we planted these 10 feet, 1 inch out of the city right away, so the city can't come in and destroy these trees, or we don't have to get any permission, and we don't affect any utilities. We put them on a 10 by 10 grid. Traditionally you would consider this overplanted, but we expect more mortality as time goes on, and we're kind of taking an accuracy by volume approach. And we're also not just trying to plant street trees, we're trying to plant street forests. So by having this many trees, you can get a forest established, which is a system that will sustain itself a lot longer than just individual trees in a line. So there's some lessons we learned from this. Definitely do 2 in a box. You double your chance of success for maybe $3 or $4 if you're using the size of saplings we bought, which are called 3-inch liners. We got them for $3 each. Just do 2 a box. It just increases your ratio of success. These are some young pecans. Those have easily tripled in height, and this was only 3 months later. Here you can see another street. We did a whole nother run along. The Grow Safe Protector, you saw those in the videos. They're basically a shield that still allow air and light to penetrate to the box, but prevent browsing, and they can also prevent damage from extreme heat. You can see this is an escarpment live oak. There's 2 live oaks in this box. One has the protector and one doesn't. Pretty clear the benefits of having that protector on there. If you have deer that will browse your trees, these protectors are essential. The deer will just destroy them. They're snacks. You're just feeding the deer. So get these protectors if you have a project in an area with deer. Survival rates. We're kind of going into a little bit of the survival rates of the project. You can see in green is dead. The colors are kind of opposite of how you would feel about it, but the green is dead, the red is alive, the blue are really alive, and the orange are stressed, which means, if we don't get some rain or some effect there, they may not make it, but the temperatures are cooling down, so they may recover. So you can see pretty good success considering we did this and then just went about our lives, came back 6 months later. That is not how living things work, not how plants work usually. In our area, it is a desert. There is no rain, things will cook and die. There was a very big difference in species between success. Quercus frisiformis performed the best, which is no surprise. These are our local live oaks, our area called the escarpment live oak. They are very well adapted to degraded soils. You'll see them growing straight out of rock at places like Enchanted Rock. They are an amazing tree. Only 6% of these died, which was like 2 or something like that. So they did very, very well. A lot of them are vigorous right now. And it's not a surprise. If we just look around from where we planted, these trees are all over the place. I think they're 80% of Austin's tree canopy, so it's clear there's a reason they're there. The pecans didn't quite do as well, which is no surprise. They're a riparian species. They want to be plugged into water at all times. We had a little closer to 17% die, and most of them are stressed. I expect a lot more of these to die. Cedar elm, another native tree to Austin, extremely drought tolerant, performed very well. Only 10% died. The rest are doing very well. I think we put stressed on there, but they just all kind of look stressed this time of year. The cedar elms start to just yellow and drop leaves from the heat. You can see one in that box. I mean, that's going to grow into a beautiful tree. I think even if we took the box off today, that tree would establish. Chinkapin oak, I was a little sad about this one. I thought these were going to do a little better. 27% of these passed. They're normally a very drought tolerant tree, but I just think the full sun on a tree that small just baked them. They have a very broad leaf. I think they just took too much heat. So these may be one that's better to establish, a little partial shade, or maybe after you get a row of trees established, you put them in. Lacy oaks, another one I thought were going to do really well, did not. I think just the full sun when they're that small was just a little too much. 30% fatality there. Just wanted to thank our program director, Stephanie, she's been a huge help with this. We brought her on, she's right here. I've never met anyone who loves trees more than her, and I love trees a lot. So, I'm not saying that lightly. She helped us, get permission from the properties to do this. She was basically 100% responsible for getting the grant. Without her, this would have taken a lot longer or not have been possible at all. So, huge shout out to her. And another shout out to my business partner, for tolerating me and my altruistic projects. Big shout out to Woot and Peter, and thank you to Victor for having us. This has been really great. And yeah, are there any questions?
So when,
Sorry, my question was, they recommend that we plant 2 trees. So what happens when they start growing? Do the 2 trees grow and are growing together, or do you take one out and pot it somewhere else?
Right, so that's a good question. In the beginning, the tree's roots, because they're the same species, and if they're from the same nursery, they're probably clonal or very similarly related. So a lot of them will actually fuse root systems very early on, and that can help them kind of exchange nutrients and energy and help each other survive. Eventually, you probably don't want 2 trees in the same spot. So with a time to be determined, you probably would want to take one out. Pick the one that's doing better, remove the one that's smaller and weaker. It's really just, when you're planting trees, the most valuable thing is time. The famous saying, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, or today, next best time, 20 years ago, yeah, whatever, I forget the saying. Anyway, so you can't get that time back. So by doubling your chances in the beginning, you're making sure you capture as much of that time as you can.
when do you decide to take the water box off, and how do you do that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The real factor is, do you think you can get it off by using your hands? Because if the tree gets too big, obviously you're not going to get it off. So I'd say generally that happens between a year and 16 months. Depends on the species, depends on the tree. But generally they say to take these off after about 16 months is max. But yeah, really you just pick it up. It's that easy. You pick it up and you kind of shimmy it and work it around to make sure you're not breaking any branches. But when the trees are that young, they're pretty bendy. You can just pop it right off. But if you can't pop it right off, you waited too long. You'll probably have to cut the box or the tree, but that would be silly. Yeah. Does everyone understand how the condensation part of it works?
No. Can you do it again? Can you explain it again, please?
Yeah, so basically the way the lid is designed and the way that the box holds water, the lid, when the night comes, the lid is going to cool much faster than the surrounding air, and then that creates condensation. And so the way the lid is designed, it funnels that condensation to 2 little tubes that then feed it down into a reservoir inside of the box. And then on the bottom of the box, let me show you. On the bottom of the box is a little wick. And so this wick basically feeds the water slowly, like the speed of drops, to where your tree is. You actually want to keep it tucked against the box like this, but it waters that soil adjacent to the tree. If you're really trying to go, if you have the ability to refill these, like they're in your yard or something, or you get close to them, you may even want to drill another hole and do 2 wicks, because that'll deliver twice the water at the same time, but that will drain it twice as fast. So if you know you're not coming back to refill these, just leave the 1 wick. But if it's in your yard or you can get a hose to it, it might be worth doing too.
In that way, the roots would come down instead of staying.
Yeah. So a lot of times when you water on the surface, and it's very common for trees to have all of their roots in the top like 8 to 10 inches, 6 to 8 inches. In Austin, some places there's not even 4 inches of soil. So it basically gets that taproot to grow deep, which allows it to tap into deeper sources of water more effectively.
There's more questions.
Sorry,
One more
just
question.
one more question.
Yeah.
At some point, Peter talked about the water that the box that could filter the water, like you could use like salt water or any of them. Do you know, like since you're the distributor, like do you know if those boxes are used or is it?
That is not a commercially available product. That was a prototype he was working on, clearly pretty close to the end of his life. I have not heard anything about that. I do know that the paper boxes, they are working on bringing those back. The paper boxes are even cooler for, you know, I would say for an urban setting, like what we're trying to do, these plastic boxes are gonna be the way to go. But if you're trying to reforest the middle of West Texas or an old mine or something like that, the paper boxes just rot away, and then you have the tree. So it's even less labor.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, you're very
Appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thank you.